extended life beyond the appropriation deadlines in 1E.
Okay, thank you. All right, the recommendations are in front of us.
One question, and then
Yes,
I'd
go
make a
ahead.
motion. The staff comments are approving the proposals with provisional language prioritizing multi-benefit projects. Could one of them be stormwater capture and reuse projects? I know a lot of people think of recreational opportunities along levees and different things. Southern California, we're trying to not dump all our water into the ocean and get it out as quickly as possible, capture and reuse it. Could that work in this context on how we view floodwater as an asset, not just a liability?
Senator Pavley, Mark Cowan again from the Department of Water Resources. I believe the intent here is multi-purpose in terms of ecosystem restoration combined with flood protection, and that's the emphasis behind this particular request for language. I don't know why this couldn't also apply to stormwater projects. However, I'd have to go back and check to see if any of this potential funding is going to end up in those types of projects.
Replenishing, capturing some of that water and spreading it out overdrafted groundwater basins seems to make a lot of sense. Otherwise,
Certainly.
It's going into San Francisco Bay or wherever it's going.
Absolutely, and we wouldn't be looking to preclude those opportunities at all.
So I just keep thinking anytime we can think of accomplishing several objectives, especially when we're faced with a dwindling water supply, and it may be able to leverage some of the dollars from other categories or auction revenues. Anyway, something to think about.
Good point.
All right, you'd have to go back to the 1E operational line, whatever the operational language was in 1E. Take a look at that. All right, we're going to really separate this into several pieces. The first will be the January budget request minus the system-wide funding piece, which is $300 million, and the May revision. Okay, that's going to be one motion. First of all, is there public comment on this, on the flood safe issue?
Someone keep Mr. Reeb in a seat.
Okay, all right. It has been moved. So system-wide, January budget request minus system-wide funding piece and the May revise. So please call the roll.
Senator Wolk?
Aye.
Senator Nielsen? Aye. Senator Pavley?
Aye.
All right, 3-0, that's approved. Now, I need a motion on the system-wide funding and the provisional language together. You want them separate? Okay. We'll move the $300 million on the system, that is the system-wide language, system-wide funding. All right, motion?
So move.
All right, it's been moved by Senator Pavley. Please call the roll.
Senator Wolk?
Aye.
Senator Nielsen? No. Senator Pavley?
Aye.
All right, 2-1, it is approved. And now the supplemental language, prioritizing multi-benefit projects. Please call the, is there a motion?
So move.
It's been moved by Senator Pavley. Please call the roll.
Senator Wolk?
Aye.
Senator Nielsen? No. Senator Pavley?
Aye.
All right, it's been approved 2-1. All right, now moving on to the BDCP and the Bay Delta water quality.
Is this the chair's favorite topic?
This is my favorite topic, but I'm so hungry. All right, as everyone else is in the
That's
room.
the
It's
good
always at
news.
the end of the agenda. Should be first on the agenda. All right, welcome.
I'm going to start.
Somebody start.
Senator, just give me a second. Here. Great. Again, my name is Chuck Bonham. I'm the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I have a few thoughts, and I'd like to start by...
Oh, can I interrupt you for a second?
Of course.
With respect to the staff recommendation, number 4 will be deleted.
Understood.
Okay? That's GGRF money. There'll be more discussion of that in the next 2 days.
Thank you.
All right, I'm sorry, Director Bonham. Start again.
Well, let me go to my bottom line, Chair, and just say something to you personally. I want to thank you. I can say from my experience, there's no more complicated and challenging natural resource issue. I've been doing this stuff from the public sector my entire career across the West, and this is the hardest, the question of the Delta. And I feel like I first got to know you when I was appointed one of the original members by Governor Schwarzenegger to the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Conservancy. And I appreciate the sense of place and the leadership and the fighting for the Delta that you've done over the years. So I know that this is a very passionate topic for you. From that spot, I'd like to acknowledge that I too am frustrated on pace of progress around restoration and finding these comprehensive solutions which have always seemed just outside our grasp. I also want to tell you what's not going on here in my sense when I read the staff report, when I listen to the public debate and the media. Look, state and federal water contractors, the beneficiaries of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project, they stay on the hook financially for every existing obligation and any future mitigation responsibility, period, full stop. It's not accurate in the media for anyone to claim a mitigation responsibility or an existing obligation will be covered by public funds. Not true. In fact, as an attorney and as director of this department, I can assure you, in my judgment, my personal judgment, Proposition 1 ensures this result. As you know, it has a suite of general provisions which expressly prohibit the use of any of Proposition 1 funds, so that's 79710A, related to conveyance. And then if you look at the Chapter 6 for restoration granting, which is 7973A, there's a clear prohibition, again, on using any DF funds for those existing obligations. And actually further says use of Proposition 1 funds have got to go that additive, that enhancement component. Same is true on our Delta funding. So I just do not believe it's accurate, nor would it be legal to argue any of the public funds are designed to deal with the existing obligation. Second thing I'll tell you that's not going on here. In my personal judgment, this is not a reduction in commitment to the ecosystem. It's not. In my judgment, what this is about is a statement of a commitment on a 3 to 5 year timeline that we can better control. The 30,000 acre target is a floor. Let's do more. But let's at least set ourselves to doing something substantial in the next 3 years we can greater control. So let me break this apart. As you now know, there's the California Eco Restore effort and there's California Water Fix. Let me start with California Water Fix. That's the conveyance infrastructure project. It will have to mitigate its own impacts in order to be permitted. So we estimate, as an example, that there could be, 2,000, 2,500 acres of actual mitigation you'd need to do relative to the conveyance project impact. That would be borne by the project proponents. Nobody's proposing Prop 1 or GGRF for any of that category. So that means then you're talking about Cal Eco Restore. Let me break that into two pieces. Yes, there's a big existing obligation. The 2008 Federal Fish and Wildlife Service biological opinion and the 2009 NIMS biological opinion basically establish already an obligation for about 25,000 acres of restoration. I'm frustrated. Should have been done. So what I believe we're doing now is saying, by gosh, we're going to get it in the pipeline, get it done in the timeline we can control the rest of this administration. But the payment for it remains as an existing obligation. You couldn't use Prop 1 for it. That means there's a remainder of about 5,000 acres, which in my mind is additive, it's enhancement, it's on top of. And those break out into a couple of areas. I see a potential for about 3,500 acres of restoration in the Delta. That's for subsidence benefit or carbon sequestration benefit. And then I see potentially 1,000, 2,000 of tidal kind of riparian restoration. That's not a cap, that's a minimum of what we'll try to sort out in the next 3 years. That's a category, about 5,000 acres, for which I think you could make a fair and legitimate public policy use around Prop 1. Last thing this is not doing, it's not a running away from the ecosystem. And let me be really blunt on this point. I'm the steward of the NCCP Act. I love it. I liked the architecture of 55 species and broad planning across a lot of conservation measures. But I'm going to be totally candid with you. I looked through the conservation and environmental community comments on the draft document. I looked through local government comments. And we got these kinds of comments. Don't do a 50-year permit. Scientific future is too uncertain in this estuary. By gosh, don't give a water guarantee of a set delivery over 50 years against climate change. We also heard you're overvaluing 100,000 acres as producing food productivity as a means to require less outflow for ecological purposes. We also heard spin off habitat restoration because you can do it as a standalone. You have existing authority. And a thing I regret is that amount of acreage talked about as an aspirational goal, in my personal view, really did undercut my relationship with local governments. Because how do you get to that amount without taking ag out of production? And I think it's gotten in the way of my relationship at a local level. I am excited about this proposition. I'm not aware of a governor telling a director of my department saying, I'm serious, existing obligations, go get them done. New stuff, go get it done. We've now got a great person, David Okita, who's going to break through our bureaucratic barriers for us. I think with Proposition 1 telling me I can't use funds for conveyance, any money I spend in the Delta, I have to start on public lands. We own 25,000 acres. Also telling me I've got to coordinate with local government. And then here's an example of how I think this could work, and I'll stop. As a former board member of the Conservancy, and the potential to take $40 million right now, I want to stand shoulder to shoulder next to the executive director, Campbell Ingram. And I want to think through how you could wisely use $40 million in this May revise to invest in the district for restoration to sequester carbon. I just funded Reclamation District 341, Ducks Unlimited, and UC Berkeley for a $10 million project in the Delta to restore 1,700 acres. I know that Mr. Ingram may say there's 2,000 or 3,000 more acres we could do with private partners. That's very exciting to me. We've got to restore the Delta. That's my orientation. That's why I think Cal Eco Restore, unencumbered from the conveyance, is the right policy decision at this moment. Let me end with just an observation about the comments on the other BCP of the department, which the Assembly Subcommittee has approved. We have a BCP about the department's overall scientific staffing needs. It breaks into 3 parts. All of it is reimbursable. It's not a request for new funding. The first part is regulatory review. That has nothing to do with the Delta projects. It has everything to do with renewable energy projects in the Delta, transportation projects with Caltran, and it seeks 3.1 in reimbursable and 19 PYs to continue through our permitting and our ability to be responsive to that sector. The next component is we want to bring in-house a water pollution lab we have, which is the state's main lab. Right now, we do it through contracting with Mr. Howard and the board. We want to pull that in, so it's 1.4 million reimbursable, and it's 10 positions. It's the lab that turns around aquatic, biotic, chemical analysis for both the board's benefit and us. And then lastly, you get down to just 3 positions which have anything to do with the Delta. 1.5 have to do with the 20-party agency interagency ecological program to continue the analysis in the Delta about the pelagic organism decline. And the other 1.5 have to do with our management of operations relative to the drought and kind of the real-time monitoring. They don't have anything to do with BCP or BDCP. So let me stop there. That's a lot to cover, but I felt it was the first chance we've had to have a dialogue about this since the governor's announcement. I know Director Cowan is ready to talk about Cal Water Fix. Mr. Howard, I think, has a smaller piece, so it's at your pleasure. Also, Mr. Ingram and Mr. Okita are here, and they may have some remarks.
See, okay, thank you. Let's go to to Director Cowan.
Thank you, Senator Wilk, and I'll just try to briefly complement Director Bonham's remarks and speak to specifically the change in approach to Endangered Species Act permitting that's contemplated in California Water Fix. And let me just note that I think it was the right thing for us to do to pursue a habitat conservation plan and natural communities conservation plan, and we put tremendous effort into that, and of course tremendous money into that over the past 8 years or longer. I've sat in this room and many other forums describing what I still believe to be the need for a comprehensive approach to addressing all of the stressors in the Delta if we expect to ever recover Delta species and have a more reliable water supply, as is described in the co-equal goals that were placed in the statute. It was with a lot of inner contemplation that we collectively arrived at the decision that we had to change our course and approach here. What became clear, as Director Bonham has noted, the uncertainty that exists within the scientific community regarding just what it's going to take to recover specific species is tremendous right now. And of course, a lot of different positions on that throughout the stakeholder community, regardless of where the scientific community collectively lands. And it became clear that we were not going to bridge the gap that uncertainty represented and be able to come to terms with a plan that provided for specific obligations of the water agencies that would be able to address all of that potential uncertainty over a 50-year permit term. So that drove us to this decision to take a different approach to permitting the Delta conveyance proposal that, of course, we've been talking about for some time. But perhaps even more importantly, what we found, especially through the significant public comment that we've received on the plan, is that a permitting process for Delta conveyance just isn't the right forum to have a discussion about all of the contribution necessary in order to recover the Delta. So we tie ourselves in knots talking about the responsibilities of the projects when we know that we need to, of course, address mitigation for the projects, but fixing the Delta is going to go beyond that. So we need to broaden the conversation and get more engaged in how we're going to address all of the stressors in the Delta if we're going to succeed. And disaggregating BDCP into Cal Eco Restore and Cal Water Fix is one part of that. It doesn't mean that we're abandoning any of the actions necessary or any of the policies necessary to recover the Delta, but we have come to the conclusion that we need to break it apart and have the right parties in the room to address each of the different actions that are going to be necessary over time. I want to be clear that this approach does not negate the project's responsibility to mitigate for itself, either the past commitments we've made for mitigation or mitigation that would be necessary if we move forward with the Delta conveyance proposal. So I'll stop there. If, when appropriate, I'd also like to address the issue of funding for removal of the salinity barriers, but I'll leave it to the chair's discretion.
All right. Mr. Howard, welcome.
So in this instance, what we're requesting is some general fund and water right fund resources to update the water quality control plan for the San Francisco Bay Sacramento Delta. This is a critical element. It's identified in the California Water Action Plan as something that the administration wants to get completed. It was also in the 2009 Delta Reform Act asking us to get criteria adopted. Just to give you a little context on this, the water quality control planning process overall is probably about 50 years old, but it's an enormously complex issue in which we have to look at all the beneficial uses of the Delta: agricultural, municipal, fish and wildlife, and adopt objectives that represent a balance among those uses. It's quite clear that we don't have all the water in the Delta to provide everything that everyone wants, and so there has to be a reasonable balance developed. And then once that's established, the board has to go through a water right proceeding, which could include thousands of water right holders throughout the Central Valley. Because of the complexity of this, we've really only been able to do it about once every 20 years or so, and that 20 years is rolling around again. We did it in '78, we did it in '95. We started again in 2009 when the legislature said that they wanted to get this done through the Delta legislation. We were assuming that the work would be sort of on par with what we had done previously, but it turns out to be much more complex than what we've done before. We divided the work into 3 phases, what we call phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1 is setting objectives on the San Joaquin River system. Phase 2 is setting objectives in the Sacramento/Delta area, including regulation of the project exports. And then phase 3 is the water right proceeding to try to implement everything. Well, we've been working pretty assiduously since 2009, and we're still trying to get across the finish line with our CEQA document for phase 1. And so, you know, this is an important thing to get done. The plan is out of date, and the only way we see to actually make more progress is to get some additional resources dedicated to it. And that is the basis for our request. The staff had a question that I could address if the chair would like. It says that the proposal for Bay Delta water quality charges the general fund and water rights fund for activities related to water supply and ecosystem resources, formerly the purview of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. Why should the general fund be used for activities that benefit water supply, permit holders drawing water from the Delta? And of course, you know, I tried to give you a sense before that this is a lot more than just simply what are the Delta exporters doing. It's actually
present a resolution. If you could just leave the roll so I could vote.
I will. Thank you.
it actually draws upon, you know, all of the activities in the Delta and how they impact all the resources in the Delta. And so the update's designed to establish these updated flow requirements and an adaptive management framework to protect public trust resources and benefit all beneficial uses. And the impacts on the Bay Delta system and all the burdens placed on the regulatory system arise not just from the project exports, nor from the post-1914 appropriators, who, if it was only them, then it would probably be appropriate to use water right funds only. But it also is caused by impacts to riparians and pre-1914 water right holders. And those parties pay no fees to the Water Board. They are not permitted by the Water Board. And yet they will likely have some responsibilities that come out of this process, and we will have to be analyzing the impact of these parties. And since our fees are based on only the impacts of the post-1914 water right appropriators, we are unable to use fees for activities that affect the pre-1914 and riparian water right holders.
All right, there was also a question to you, Chuck. And the Department of Fish and Wildlife proposal references the need for continued funding, and you mentioned it, for research, ecosystem restoration, and permit-related activities, all to be reimbursed by DWR. Who ultimately pays for the work? Should the water supply permit holders be directly funding this work instead? Given the shift in focus of the administration, how does this budget proposal fit in?
Okay, first, a small
3.1
percentage
million.
of this proposed work is to be covered by DWR. So let me break it apart again.
Okay.
We have 3 categories of need here. The total BCP is for 32 3-year limited term positions. Okay, 19 positions have nothing to do with DWR, and 3.1 million of that has nothing to do with DWR. That's things around lake and stream bed alteration agreements, California Endangered Species Act permits, out in the development community of renewable energy projects, Caltrans, flood control. Other parties will be reimbursing in this category for work not related to DWR's state water project. The second part of the BCP is about the department's scientific laboratory program services. This is 10 positions, and it's for 1.4 million reimbursable. And as I understand it, has nothing to do with the Department of Water Resources. It's a relationship between my department and the State Water Board. And it relates to our department managing a water quality lab about aquatic ecosystem, benthic macroinvertebrate, those kinds of things. And it's a service that's applicable statewide as we're managing pollutants in waterways. Then you get down to the last piece, which has any nexus to DWR. Of the 32 positions, there are 3. Of the 5.1 million, there's $600,000. Here, we're asking for 1.5 positions to be allocated, again, continue into what we call the Interagency Ecological Program, IEP. It is an umbrella association of all the state and federal entities working in the Delta, so think USGS, all the federal agencies. It's the consortium of federal and state scientists to manage an annual scientific program across all kinds of stuff, methyl mercury monitoring to predator fish to the pelagic organism decline. And there, 300,000, we're asking for reimbursement from DWR, and 300,000 from the Bureau of Reclamation. That's been the funding structure for this work as long as I've been director, and I believe previous to me. Then we're seeking 1.5 positions, and that 300,000 for our department's engagement in the real-time operations, kind of the analysis of the 2 projects, the decisions we're making around salinity, turbidity, management of the 2 projects. I think we had an incorrect BCP title, if you will, to think about it, because we put BDCP down there. I'd be glad to continue the conversation with you to clarify exactly what we're seeking this support for.
I appreciate that.